Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Welcome to the Tons of Industry Show. I have a bombshell show for you today. You're going to really enjoy this one. Dave JANDA is on the show, DaveJanda.com. Operation Freedom, a regular guest on Greg Hunter, for example, which we know President Trump is listening to on a regular basis. And it's just going to be a great show. Dave, first of all, Dr. Dave, thanks for being on.
Dave is fine. Thank you very much, Leo. It's an honor to be on your platform again. I enjoy everything you do.
Well, I appreciate that. I think my partner would appreciate that on Crush the Street. We are on wealthresearchgroup.com right now. And I really want to ask you, let's start with, you've worked with government for 30 years now or thereabouts. Can you share with me, please, some out-of-body experiences that you've had just talking with elected officials? I can only imagine when somebody wants to come in and actually help the people of the United States as a group, as a general group, with something that will happen, will help the majority of them. Obviously, you can never help everyone. That's one of the compromises of democracy, and we all know that. But it seems at times that democracy in the U.S. is two wolves deciding and one sheep deciding what to eat for dinner, right? So it's very hard for people who have a genuine interest in people to find solace in Washington. So can you share with me some experiences and with the audience where you literally sat there in the room and you tremored. You said, I can't believe I'm talking to an elected official, to somebody who should be for the people and by the people?
Well, I'd be happy to, actually. You mentioned in my introduction, I'm a doctor. I'm a trained orthopedic surgeon. I practiced orthopedic surgery for 32 years. In addition to my work in orthopedic surgery, I focused the research side of my career on focusing on prevention and healthcare cost containment, which is what led me to Washington. One of our studies, according to the United States federal government, has prevented 1.7 million people from being injured a year and saved $2 billion in healthcare costs a year. We spent $1,000 on that series of studies. It got the attention of then President Ronald Reagan, who asked me to come to Washington and work with C. Everett Koop, the then Surgeon General, on healthcare policy. And for 30 years, Reagan administration, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, not Obama, because my approach is on free markets, and Barack Obama wanted to have nothing to do with free markets when it came to the healthcare scene and healthcare policy. But I have developed relationships with folks in Washington over 30 years, people in government agencies, a number of different government agencies, which has given me an opportunity to bring these people forward on my radio show, Operation Freedom, and on the platform that you spoke about, DaveJanda.com. And probably one of the most memorable experiences I had in Washington and have had in Washington is I had been asked to testify in front of Congress on healthcare policy, on the role and the power of prevention and wellness initiatives. And I presented to Congress, the subcommittee of Congress, and it went very well. And again, this is about 1989. An individual walked up to me after my congressional testimony, and this is not something I would do now, just because I get a lot of grief for what I do, because I come at it from the public side of the equation. I am seen as someone who takes on big pharmaceutical companies, big insurance companies, big medicine, the AMA, and big government folks. So I'm not a liked guy, if you will, Leo, in Washington. I take on Republicans and Democrats alike, just because I've gone on record as saying there's really one political party in the United States, the Republicrats, and they're all owned by a criminal syndicate. Therefore, the Paul Ryans of the world, the Mitch McConnells of the world, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, the Chuck Schumers of the world, so whether they're Republican or Democrat, they all despise me, which I actually take as a badge of honor. I had testified in front of Congress about prevention and wellness. This is in '89, and this person comes up to me and says, "I'm so and so, and I represent the chairman of the Republican Party, Lee Atwater." Now, Lee Atwater was the former campaign director for George Bush the First. He ran his campaign that when he won the presidency in 1988. He says, "I represent Lee Atwater, the chairman of the Republican Party. He was watching your congressional testimony on C-SPAN and really liked it and would like to talk to you." Okay. He goes, "If you'll come with me, we'll go over to his office." So, again, being a naive individual at the time, which I would not do now, I followed this person. We got in his car. We drove over to the Republican National Committee headquarters. And he ushered me up to Mr. Atwater's office. Mr. Atwater was sitting there with his boots on his desk, playing a guitar, and he looked at me and he goes, "Sit down, Dr. Janda." Well, okay, I sat down, and he said, "I watched your testimony, and I want to let you know that I thought it was excellent." "Oh, well, thanks. That's very nice of you to say that." I'm not sure anybody else in the room liked it, but because I was I was across the board slamming individuals left and right for not doing this earlier, but thank you. And he said, "Yeah," he goes, "So here's the deal." He goes, you communicate very effectively with people." He goes, "I've been in this business long enough where I know that if there's someone who can connect with the public, you're one of those people." And he goes, he goes, "Based on what I saw today," he goes, "you will be asked to run for a political office, House of Representatives, the Senate, a governor." And he goes, "Frankly, based on your presentation style," he goes, "I believe you'll win, no matter what you run for." And he said, "But let me tell you something about this city." He goes, "It's a really bad place." He goes, and this is one of those conversations, Leor, that I think about almost every day. There are few conversations you have in your life that stick with you where you kind of go back to. This is one that I go back to almost every day. He looked at me and he said, "You're an albino in a sea of black." He goes, "I did a little background check on you before you came over here, and I know that you're married. I know you work as a physician. You do all this healthcare policy research, and you have this little baby daughter at home, red hair." And I'm thinking, well, this is kind of creepy, but no. And I look at him. I said, "Well, that's all true." He goes, "So I'm going to give you some friendly advice." He goes, "When they ask you to run for office, say no." And I look at him and I go, "Well, I never contemplated running for office. No." He goes, "Well, just say no, okay?" And he looked at me dead straight in the eyes and said, "They will kill you." I don't mean figuratively. I mean literally. He goes, "Dr. Janda, you're an honest guy. You can't be bought." He goes, "Your track record shows that. You've taken on big entities with your research to help people. You can't be bought. That's the bottom line with you." He goes, "Never, ever run for political office." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, thanks, but was that a threat or was that friendly advice?" And he goes, no, look." He goes, "I really like you a lot." He goes, "You're really a good guy. But it wasn't a threat. It's friendly advice." He goes, "You know what? If you want your daughter to know who her daddy is, and you want your wife not to be a widow, keep being a really great doc, keep doing your research, keep doing all your media presentations, keep doing what's right for people, but don't get involved in politics."
Well, what more can I tell you about that sort of scenario? Let me switch over because it got me thinking about President Trump and the stuff that he's doing, and I wonder because we've seen on the alternative media at times that people are saying if he does that, they'll try and whack him out, they'll try and impeach him, they'll try and do this, try and do that, because he's pushing the borders as well, and he's doing stuff that other presidents have not done. Okay, let's talk a little bit about President Trump and what's going on right now. And I want to ask you, do you think he's playing a grand chess match, or do you think he's naive? Do you think he really understands what he's doing, or do you think he's over his head? I have been contemplating that question for a year and a half. Does he know the full picture? Does he know everything that other presidents know, or are people that should be telling him information concealing it from him? Where is he on the scope of brilliance? Is he just the most brilliant guy, and everything you're seeing is part of a game, or is he an emotional person who can't control himself, and therefore you're seeing these lashing outs? Where do you think he is? Because it's a very important question at the end of the day, because we all know a president is an actor. It's part of this situation. I mean, Ronald Reagan was an actor, if I'm not mistaken, correct? So, and obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger was an actor. So, are we seeing an act, or are we seeing the real person come out at times? And obviously anyone who's ever seen a very serious show or TV show or movie about politics, he knows that what the public sees is not even 1% of what's going on behind the scenes, or how this person really is behind the scenes, what his character is, and who more than you should know how these people act when there's not a camera on their face. So what's your assessment, and what do you think will happen in 2019 for President Trump? And let me just throw that little caveat in the end. Do you think he will get reelected?
So when I look at an individual, the best information I can get on an individual is their track record. People who've dealt with those individuals the longest. Now, I have a little insight on Donald Trump that most people are unaware. And that is the following. My dad I was very blessed to have him as my dad. He was an incredibly smart individual, honest individual, hardworking, but also was one of the best judges of people I know of that I've come in contact with in my life. My dad was in the construction industry. He was a general contractor, civil engineer. He built a lot of buildings in the city of Chicago. Built a big chunk of O'Hare Airport in Chicago. My dad, over 30 years ago, had interactions with Donald Trump. Now, my dad has passed. He died in 2013. But I remember the interactions my dad had with Donald Trump. And because my mom was not exactly a fan of Donald Trump 30-some years ago. She thought he was boisterous and kind of full of himself. So I remember when my dad had some meetings with Trump in Chicago about some projects. My dad came back from those meetings, and I remember my mom said, "Hey, Ben, how did that go with that guy who's he's so full of himself, and he's so da-da-da-da-da." And my dad said, "Well, interesting. He's very different in private than he is in public." He goes, one, he's very smart. He's very analytical. He doesn't talk a lot. He listens. He goes, I found that to be very surprising, actually, but he listens, and he goes, frankly, I tested him because what I did is I pushed a lot of information in front of him that I'm sure he did not want to hear. He did not want to hear. But what he did is he didn't fight me on it. He goes, what he did is he listened, and then he asked me, well, with these problems that you've identified, what do you think needs to happen to get them fixed? And he goes, and when he was done listening to me, he goes, the thing about Trump is he has a lot of very smart people around him based on the insight that they provided at this meeting. And he said he then went around the room to ask all the other people in the room their opinion. And then what he did is he took everybody's opinion. He goes, now, this is without writing anything down. he put everything together in his mind, and then he presented an option as a potential solution that pulled some of mine, pulled some of his assistants, pulled some. And he goes, I found the guy to be incredibly smart, analytical, and willing to listen. So my dad had other interactions with Trump over several years after that, and he always said the same thing about Trump. He said, you know, and my dad dealt with a lot of these folks in private as well as public, as now in my life as I've gotten older, I've done the same thing with a number of different people. And they can be very different in private than they are in public. And the point about Trump is that I think he relishes this. The people who oppose him underestimate him. And he uses that underestimation to ultimately get the best of them. If you look at the reaction of the globalists, you see, when I talk about globalists, and this was introduced to me back in 1988 when I first went to do healthcare policy in Washington. You know, when I got there with Reagan, you met with one of his assistants, and the assistant said, listen, we want to make sure everybody's on the same page of the playbook, and here's how the boss, President Reagan, looks at the world. The right-left axis is pure theater. It's meant to put people at each other's throats. It's meant to divide and conquer. The real axis to work on is the up-down axis, up being freedom and down being oppression. And there's a group of people, bad, not so great people, really bad people, that want to work that up-down axis and want to oppress as many people as possible. And our goal with this administration is to work that up-down axis, but work on the freedom side, and in pushing freedom for every person in our country and around the world. And in so doing, we will defeat the people that are trying to oppress so many people. What they were speaking about, that axis, was the axis that the deep state, the globalist syndicate, the New World Order works. They work the up-down axis and use the right-left axis to have people at each other's throats. And this is where I believe Trump is the first president since Reagan that also works that axis. I believe, and there are different, in going through this over all the years, I believe there are several silos of globalists. The silo that has had the most power and most control is the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis, or the silo of the globalists. There are a number of other silos. And that doesn't mean that Donald Trump doesn't, I think he's an enemy, if you will, of the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis. If you look at how the puppets that are associated with that axis react to him. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't interact with other globalists that are in other silos. For example, I believe the silo that Trump works on is a silo that's working for, if you will, not the destruction of sovereign entities, but actually the maintenance and prosperity of sovereign entities, and hopefully that these sovereign entities all get along in the world. So this is this old nationalist versus globalist thing. And I believe Donald Trump works in that silo and interdigitates and interacts with other globalists that are in that silo, that are more of the, what's his theme? Make America Great silo. Okay, make America great. Make each country great. And as each country gets great, the whole world gets lifted up, and okay, everybody's better off. As opposed to the Rothschild-Rockefeller silo, which is about the destruction of sovereignties of countries and a creating of a new world order. So I believe Donald Trump is he's misunderstood. I believe he's underestimated by his opponents. And this is why we see some of this hysterical reaction to him and his policies. There are many things Donald Trump says and does and how he does them that I would not do. On the other hand, I think when it all comes down to it, based on what my dad's interactions with him over time were, is that Trump works the up-down axis and is trying to enhance the freedoms of Americans and people of the world. And he is in direct opposition to the globalist power of the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis that has been driving the Titanic into the iceberg over the past 100 and some years. I believe he is intelligent. I believe he is analytical. Now, that being said, when healthcare came to the forefront this past year, I provided information to his administration that I'm not convinced they were very happy about, because at one point they were putting their arms around this Paul Ryan, who I believe is a globalist from the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis, and good riddance, he's leaving Congress because, and as far as I'm concerned, don't let the door hit you in the backside. Ryan was pushing an alternative to Obamacare, which was really another version of Obamacare. And when I analyzed it and the administration started to get behind it, I spoke up and said, look, this is another insurance industry sellout. This is not going to solve the problems of Obamacare. This is not going to focus on free market reforms of enhancing the availability and affordability and the access and the increase of quality of care for every American. Now, there were folks in his administration that were not happy with my analysis because they were getting behind the Ryan plan. But when it all came down to it, kind of Trump put his hands up at the very end and said, okay, well, this Ryan thing isn't working right. I don't like how it's looking. So, we're just going to back off for now. So, I think there are people in his administration that were not happy with me, that I spoke up. On the other hand, I never got any pushback from them saying, as I did from the Obama administration, you better shut up, and if you don't shut up, bad things are going to happen to you.
That's very, very interesting, Dave. I want to ask you, talking about Trump, one of the taboos of many of these presidents is relating to the Federal Reserve, either antagonistically or positively, but they just don't do that. And I've been around for 20 years. I've been investing since the age of 16, and I can attest to what happened between 1913 and the year 2000 when it comes to presidents, except for things that I've read in hundreds of books about the Federal Reserve System and revolving it. But could you talk first account on what it resembles Trump, and which other presidents have done the same thing with regards to the Federal Reserve? Which other presidents have been aggressive about the Federal Reserve, either pro or con? More con, because I think the audience would love to hear what happens when you push that entity too far.
Well, I'd be happy to, Lior. The book that I'm fond of when it comes to the Federal Reserve is a book written by someone I consider a friend, someone who's been on my show several times. G. Edward Griffin wrote the book The Creature from Jekyll Island. And I believe that book is very well done. And I believe outlines the creature being the Federal Reserve, which is a tentacle of the criminal international banking syndicate, the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis. And in my lifetime, there are, and it's long, a lot longer than yours, in my lifetime, there were very few presidents that would take on the Federal Reserve System or question the Federal Reserve System. Usually, as you mentioned, there's deafening silence, or there's a little pat on the back saying, yeah, good. The presidents in my lifetime that took on the Fed, one was John Kennedy. I do not believe that was the sole reason why Dallas happened. The event in Dallas happened over now 55 years ago. But it could have been a component of it, because what he was fighting against were the globalists. Whether it was the globalists that were involved in our intelligence agencies or the globalists that were involved in the Federal Reserve System, he did take them on. Another one who took them on and would not as directly as Trump, but did point the finger occasionally at the Fed as being an issue was Ronald Reagan. We all know what happened to Kennedy in Dallas in '63, November '63. We also know that Ronald Reagan, 2 months into his presidency, I believe March 30th of 1981, there was an assassination attempt on his life. And the person who has been most direct, most overt about his issues with the Fed has been Donald Trump. I mean, just look what he said the other day. I mean, he said the Federal Reserve System is a much bigger problem than China. Now, remember, he has painted a picture of China about their trade policies, about how dishonest they are, about how harmful they are to every American citizen. He has painted that for many months. So when he makes a statement that the Federal Reserve is, quote, a much bigger problem than China, people sit back in the United States and go, wait a minute. He has gone on for months saying how bad China is for us. So if China's so bad for us, but these dudes in the Federal Reserve are worse, well, what are they doing that we don't know about? And he's pointed the finger, and he's pointed the finger more, if you will, often at the Fed over the past, couple, 3 months. I mean, the last being the China statement, but prior to that, quote, I think the Fed's gone crazy. It was in October. Quote, my biggest threat is the Fed, end quote. Again in early October. Trump escalates Powell on attack. Quote, every time we do something great, he raises rates, end quote. If Donald Trump, in my lifetime, has taken on the Fed in more of a frontal assault, not just policy-wise, not just behind the curtain, but in the public, more than any president I'm aware of. And I believe he's doing that for a reason. And the reason is the following. I believe, when you look at Donald Trump's background, one of the, to build, and I know this from my dad's experience, when you build a big building, the logistics of that are enormous. You have to be an air traffic controller extraordinaire. If you're overseeing that project, you have to have thousands of pieces of information in front of you every minute of every day for that project to come to fruition. You can't be stupid. You have to be analytical, and you have to be forward thinking. For Trump not just to build one building or 2 buildings or 10 buildings, but dozens of buildings around the world. And granted, he has very good people working for him. But he is still the guy whose name is on the company, and he's the guy who has to answer the phone when they say there's a problem with a Trump project. He has to have all these different projects where he's overseeing, and it's a logistics nightmare. And for him to do that, you have to be able to take in huge amounts of information, synthesize it, analyze it, and then take appropriate steps to make the project come to fruition. And I believe the project that he's looking at is looking at the economic welfare of every American, as any president should do. But because he's not a globalist of the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis, I believe he truly is looking out for the welfare of every American. I believe when he took the reins of power, I believe he thought, okay, we're $21 trillion in debt. This is a huge problem, but I have an idea of how I think we can get out of this. Okay. Part of it, we're going to grow out of it. Part of it, we're going to deflate the dollar a bit so that, we can pay back our interest rate payments maybe at a little bit, if you will, with cheaper dollars. Maybe we might have to default somewhere on something like he recommended for Puerto Rico. But I believe he had a bit of a plan set. And remember, one of Donald Trump's greatest strengths is dealing with bankruptcy law. I mean, if you look at his track record, he has utilized the bankruptcy situation and laws to his advantage and leveraged his positions through bankruptcy courts so that he's actually much better out coming out than he is going in. So I think he looked at the bottom line of the United States and thought, okay, this is hard, but it's doable. Then he got confronted, I believe, with a whole different set of books. And that set of books showed that we're not just 21 trillion in debt, and it's not just more than just the unfunded mandates, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the like, but there's a lot of off money off the books that he was confronted with. And I think he realized, we're not going to grow out of this. And this is far worse than I thought. So I think what he did going into the election, he kept saying, the markets are a fraud. They're smoke and mirrors. The government statistics are a fraud. Everything's a fraud. And then when he got there, all of a sudden he starts saying, hey, the stock market's doing great. This is my stock market. This is my economy. No talk about fraudulent government numbers. Nothing about smoke and mirrors in the markets. And I believe what he was doing is buying time. And I believe a number of these globalists he has around him, Steve Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury, former Chief of Staff Gary Cohen, Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Commerce, known globalists. I believe they're there because he wanted them there because he essentially took them hostage. I think he brought them close to himself and he said, look, you globalist pieces of stuff, you got our country into this mess. So we're on the Titanic. You guys have commandeered the Titanic for decades. You ran it into the iceberg. You're not getting off the ship, okay? You're with me on this. And you're going to use all your cohorts and all your connections and all your buddies in the globalist Rothschild Rockefeller axis. And you're not only going to keep this thing afloat, but we're actually going to blow the numbers even higher. And it's going to buy us a bunch of time. So I can negotiate with our creditors and make it so that when this thing goes down, Joe American, Jane American is not as adversely affected as was your business model plan if Hillary would have won. And I believe that's what he's been doing. And I believe behind the scenes he's been negotiating with our largest creditor, China. I think a lot of this trade war talk and a lot of the things going on is legit, but I also think it's some smoke and mirrors and some theater to distract over what he's been doing. I also think that one of the issues he talks about with Putin is about, as the system comes down, what do we do to make sure that it's not a catastrophic event for millions, let alone hundreds of millions, let alone billions of people. And I think this is where we are with him right now. And this is where we are with him economically. And I think that I believe that there is an economic, financial times are going to be different. And if you want to call it a reset or whatever it's going to be. But I believe that Trump, along with a number of other people around the world, are trying to make it so that when the system does reset, yeah, there might be some tough days, weeks, maybe several months, but when we come out of that tunnel, we're going to be all better off than we were going in. When you look at the amount of debt we have in the system, when you look at the derivatives associated with that debt and the like. And I think that's the biggest, if you will, piece of the pie that he works on a daily basis.
Now, Dave, I know that there's so much more that you can talk about and cover, and I know you do. You have a radio show, you have your platforms. Can you tell people where they can find more information? Because I know there's a ton of stuff that you do, and you're just relentless on this. You've been at this for years, and just let everybody know where they can check everything out regarding yourself and the network of people that you talk with.
Thank you. So my radio show is Operation Freedom. And folks can listen to it over the internet. This past week, we had folks from over 70 countries listening to the show. If they go to my website, Dave Janda, it's like Panda with a J, Dave Janda, Janda, DaveJanda.com. The show airs 2 to 5 Eastern every Sunday. They can listen to the show live if they hit the upper right-hand corner of the listen button. We have a tremendous amount of free content that we upload on DaveJanda.com on a regular basis. And then I have a subscription side, 30 cents a day, $9 a month. Folks can sign up for a month and get rid of it if they don't like it. But we not only have the podcast of the radio show available for our subscribers, but we also have several other shows. My WTF show, which is a geopolitical analysis show. We have our Insider Insight show where I interview a number of my contacts from behind the curtain, if you will, that don't go on other platforms or on the bought-off lamestream fake media, which is an arm of the globalist syndicate, but they do interview with me. This coming week, I have famed whistleblowers Bill Binney and Kirk Wybie, both of whom it's kind of like having Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig on at the same time. They are the whistleblowers. These are the guys that blew the whistle on the fact that the United States government monitors every phone call, internet activity, financial transaction, phone call of every American citizen. It has been for years. They're the guys who went on record, blew the whistle on that. It upset Robert Mueller, who was then director of the FBI, so much they actually knocked down Bill Binney's door and an agent put a gun to Bill's head to try to have him shut up. So we're having Bill Binney and Kurt Wybie on this week on our Insider Insight show. So folks can go to DaveJanda.com. They can spin around, take a look at what we have there, free side, free side, and then the subscription side. I also have a YouTube channel, Operation Freedom. I upload about one or two YouTubes a week on events that are happening around the world, geopolitical issues, based on information I get from my contacts. And those are the best ways to stay in touch. And again, folks can listen to the radio show live, free, every Sunday at DaveJanda.com, 2 to 5 Eastern.
Dave, thank you very much for taking the time, and this was a really, really interesting interview.
Well, I thank you very much for learning everything that you do on your platform. I thank you because the more people that become knowledgeable about information that the bought-off lamestream fake media doesn't want to provide or doesn't provide, the more people that become knowledgeable about the information you provide that they're not going to get from the fake media, the more empowered they really are.
Thank you, sir.